Okay, I think we should get started now. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is the inaugural event for talking about transitions, which is a new dialogue series that we at Transitions Research just started. The discussion series hopes to feature critical conversations on the systemic shifts at the interplay of technology, society, and sustainability. We hope for this series to provide a platform for thinking about three major areas of change and challenge: urbanization, climate change, and digitization. This dialogue aims to understand the role and applicability of boundary institutions like urban living labs for building resilience and planning emerging risks in the context of growing cities in the global south. We're excited to be hosting this in collaboration with Global Resilience Partnership. Global Resilience Partnership advances resilience through identifying and scaling on the ground innovation, generating and sharing knowledge, and shaping policy. Over the course of the next hour, a colleague from GRP, Suchi Bora, will be moderating this discussion. Suchi is a resilience professional with about a decade of programming experience at the interface of science, policy, and practice. At the Global Resilience Partnership, she currently leads the shared learning pillar of GRP's work and coordinates the Resilience Knowledge Coalition. She's worked on implementing urban water resilience in South Asia through different urban governance and finance models, including IUWM and water funds. She uses systems thinking, foresight, and collaborative transdisciplinary approaches to co-produce knowledge in complex settings. She has degrees from Oxford, TIS, and NIT Warangal. Before I pass on the mic to Suchi, some basic housekeeping. Please keep yourselves on mute if you're not speaking. We also request you to raise your hands in the Q&A section or type your questions in the chat later in the session. All right, over to you, Suchi.
Thanks. I will not take too long. Hi, everyone. Good to see some familiar faces and some new faces as well. I'm very pleased to be co-hosting this session and moderating this session today. And we have an exciting lineup of speakers. We have Vikram from Transitions Research. We have Soren, who's from Copenhagen and has established the Urban Living Lab there. And we have Neha, who's a doctoral researcher from Rotterdam. So very pleased to have all of you. And just to set some context to the session today, we're talking about, as Charu mentioned, we're talking about the Urban Living Labs, which is an innovative approach to testing innovation, for using cities as hotbeds for testing innovation, and through allowing for multi-stakeholder dialogue and approaches that allow for collaboration and partnership to flourish and foster. So in that respect, one would argue that cities in the global south, while they need that direction, one would argue that they are already resilient. And this form that has this form of or this concept of the urban living lab that has originated in Europe and has proliferated in Northern Europe allows us to learn and understand the kind of partnerships that are forming across the world, North and South, but also giving us an opportunity to learn from cities of the global South like Panjim, where this has been implemented and adapted to, and see if there are lessons across cities of not just India, but across the majority world. And with that, I hand over to Vikram. Vikram is the founding director of Transitions Research. He is a multidisciplinary research professional, and his research explores the role of human choice and societal decision-making in the face of normative and scientific uncertainty in relation of climate change, emerging technologies, and human settlement. He received his DPhil degree from Oxford, the Institute for Science, Society, and Innovation there. He holds a master's degree in urban and regional planning from the Royal Institute of Technology, Sweden, and a bachelor's degree in chemical and environmental engineering from McGill University. Vikram, over to you. Thanks. Vikram, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm trying to multitask with the screen sharing and and unmuting myself. And I might actually request my colleague Ashali to share the screen just to give the context of what I'm presenting today. And thank you, welcome everybody for being here. I think the idea of this kind of conversation came up a few months ago in part when we were having a conversation with Suchi about what kind of institutional frameworks are possible in the context of Indian cities, which have this kind of layers of complexity to think about adaptation and resilience. So it's largely a for us. It's largely today a conversation about these institutional frameworks, and I am presenting today from a urban living lab that was set up by Transitions Research in partnership with Oxford Policy Management, Rambol, Terry, and others, and with the support of the Royal Danish government and their Green Strategic Partnership in the city of Panjim in India. And really the idea of the Urban Living Lab emerged at that stage from the conversations in the context of Indian Smart Cities mission, which was talking a lot about innovation and new technologies and global experiences and so on and so forth. But as we interpreted this, we said a lot of this kind of innovation is not tested on the ground. And I saw the Urban Living Lab as a platform to test out socio-technological innovation in the laboratory and the real life laboratory of the city, right? At least that's the formal definition. Next. Yeah, I'm kind of going to move a little bit fast through this, and I know I should probably say something about Panjim. Panjim is the capital city of the state of Goa, and in India, and from a water kind of, it's a really complex city, and we have Soren here, but to me sometimes it reminds me of some of the Scandinavian capitals which have archipelagos, lakes, rivers, all meshed in. And in Goa, on top of all that, you have this traditional irrigation systems. So for us, the kind of water ecology and the complex ecology with its mangroves was really the exciting context to test out this urban living lab. And also, as many are aware, Goa is under a lot of development pressure and a lot of real estate pressure, and many of these green spaces are slowly being lost. So the idea really was to, in the context of resilience, look at global solutions and bring them and test them out in an Indian city through this urban living lab. Next slide, please. This is something I've already touched upon, but definitely I think obviously when it comes to adaptation planning, there is a lot of complexity and uncertainty in relation to being able to predict when the floods will happen, at what scale, right? So there is this kind of scientific lack of capacity and understanding. But we also have institutional fragmentation, which is fairly severe. I will come to an example of a creek, a tidal creek in the city of Panjim, which had 14 different government bodies that were responsible for acting upon it. From the Coast Conservation Authority to Port Authority to Public Works Department. It was pretty insane. And then there was the whole kind of interest of politicians and the private sector and citizens around its well-being. So that institutional complexity, the social inequities that frame these contexts, and how do you take those into consideration? So, really a complex set of issues that we were trying to see if we can develop a way of addressing in the context of an urban living lab. Next slide. So, so our urban living lab, which was called PUL, and it was called the Project Urban Living Lab, but we are hoping that it's going to transition into Panjim Urban Living Lab, and therefore the acronym will stick. A very strong part of what our lab was, which is different from some of the European labs, is that there was a strong research component, that we found that when it came to a lot of the issues around climate resilience and adaptation and water resilience, there was severe lack of data, and there was severe lack of understanding, and even primary data on, we had to even do a digital terrain map of the city, which didn't exist. So this kind of idea of creating new knowledge was a strong part of what we were doing. We were also seeking to engage multiple stakeholders, and one of our big successes in the Project Urban Living Lab was constituting a 14 interdepartmental committee for a creek with 14 departments on it, and to present this rejuvenation plan that we worked on, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about. So that was the kind of engagement. We were engaging with citizens through various kinds of methods in this process, and we were trying to see if there were global solutions. Particularly in this case, we were working with Ramboll, which is a Danish kind of consultancy, and has worked on rejuvenation of water bodies, but also this cloudburst plan for Copenhagen. So like, how do you bring global experience, which is developed in a really different context, to Indian city? Is it even relevant to try and do that, right? So that was the experimenting side of it. Next slide, please. I've already, so basically I'm going to talk we had several thematic focus areas. Today I'm just going to talk about the water resilience work that we sought to do in Panjim, which had three major components: one on urban flooding, one on rejuvenation of a tidal creek, which was really important for the water ecology of the city, but has now really become denuded, and is constantly the cause of flooding. And then we also had a specific effort on this notion of nature-based solutions, particularly in relation to the mangroves in the city, but also dunes and some other ecological assets around the city. So these were the focus areas. Next. So in urban flooding, again, obviously, I'm not going to talk about the specific interventions that we came up with, but basically we picked a section of the city for which we then generated primary data. I remember we had to go through a grueling process of getting approval to do a survey to create a digital terrain map, because Goa is a naval base, and it was really complex, and nobody had the digital terrain map, and the water resource department and the public work department officials knew what the condition of the drains was, but there was really no drain map. So a lot of primary data collection, but we also had some exercises on citizen engagement and understanding what areas were flooding, and then we worked with Ramboll, which was our global partner, to think about flood management for particular sections of the city, and so in some sense this was not followed through to implementation. So it's not, in that sense, this experiment is not complete, that we didn't take a solution and build it in the city, but we definitely did kind of identify what these were and passed it through a committee. Next slide, please. I've already spoken about the St. Ines Creek. It is a really kind of emotive, almost, in the context of Goa. This creek, which is a very strong part of the water ecology of the city, but it's the headlands and the water catchment is severely developed, and many parts of the creek have been encroached. The buffer areas have been encroached, and it's a really complex creek. It's got not complex ecologically, it's like a little, it is not it's fairly simple, water body that passes through the city, but it flows into the river. So the captain of ports, it's the Coastal Zone Authority, the Water Resources Department, the Public Works Department, the City Corporation, and many bodies have a jurisdiction over it. And we worked on trying to create a rejuvenation plan of the city, and many attempts in the past have been made to rejuvenation. And I think the main success I can say of our effort in this case was this interdepartmental committee, which was in some sense validating and approving various stages of development, from our vision setting to identifying specific solutions in different locations of the city. So next. Next slide, please. And then finally, we worked on nature-based solutions, and obviously this is a new idea. And although we have a forest department which has jurisdiction over mangroves, as also the town and country planning office, but this kind of more global idea of a nature-based solution, we tried to introduce it, and I can't say it was entirely successful, but there is a lot of interest to look at the restoration of various ecological assets, and this whole idea that somehow this restoration could have private sector investment coming in and could be funded in other ways is something that the lab sought to explore. So I have, next slide, please. I want to start wrapping up, and basically, so I think as we go forward, especially I think when Neha comes in, we'll be able to critically think about whether this kind of a approach is interesting for the context of Indian cities, or is it just another management framework that is coming from the West that we perhaps aren't critically adopting. But I mean, I would say that in many ways, at least my personal view, and this is entirely my personal view, that it was a fairly interesting and successful effort. I was the team leader, so I might be biased, but I think several things worked in our favor. I think the fact that we were geographically anchored in the city of Panjim, and it's a relatively small city, and we were dealing with specific neighborhoods, that was really helpful in bringing down the, having some really sort of grounded conversations. There was also strong demand and support from the government. We had, and this was really like people that we were lucky with, from the director of the town and country planning office to the mayor to the secretary of the urban development authority, were really supportive of the effort. And so that was a really important component. I think the technical capacity of global partners, especially having an international partner like Rambol, which has like huge engineering experience, helped us kind of create legitimacy, at least with the government and with the other stakeholders. And it's always interesting to say, oh, this is this brilliant solution that we are bringing and testing in the city of Panjim from somewhere else. I think that kind of work, but I also think that there was a lot of interesting ideas that came up, and I think some of these were like the reasons why in this context I think we achieved some degree of success, but I have not stopped thinking about the whole idea of urban living lab critically, and I think that is what we wanted to examine here. And we also sort of wanted to focus on seeing whether in the context of climate action, particularly resilience, where the data and the science and the stakeholder issues remain so complex, is this kind of slightly more experimental approach some way to kind of break out of the box? I don't know, so that's how I see it. And thank you very much for your attention. Over to you, Suchi. I hope I didn't exceed my time too much.
All good. Thanks, Vikram. With that, I will not take too long to introduce Soren, but we'll have him speak next. Soren is a governance expert working with climate resilience since 2015. He set up the first urban living lab for climate adaptation in Copenhagen with the Greater Copenhagen utility and key local, regional, and national stakeholders in the Danish climate adaptation. And now this is embedded within the Danish Climate Adaptation Network, the first national and permanent multi-stakeholder organization comprising a majority of the most important agencies, interest organizations, scientific institutions, and private enterprises. Today, he is an independent project management consultant who continues to work for a faster and market-driven green transition. He's currently engaged in the development of an inter-regional climate resilience partnership and platform for joint innovation action in the Danish-Swedish cross-border region for Greater Copenhagen. Soren, over to you.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's very exciting to have a chance to exchange experiences in this area, because it is a rather interesting field. It's as I think Vikram has pointed out, so many of the absolutely most relevant aspects of this whole urban living lab complex, and we're not far from each other in terms of what the challenging aspects are really, but I'll come back to that. First and foremost, how much time do I have for this short intro? Sorry.
You can take about 6 to 7 minutes, if that's okay. We're
okay, great. Okay.
Yeah.
I was trying to sort of wrap my head around, where to how to go about this, because there are many different angles. But I think I'll hold on to the governance aspects, because
Sure.
for me, this urban living labs or whatever you choose to call it is for me it's a mechanism to further joint action or joint decision making in order to tackle specific but very complex problems in a specific geographical context. So it can be very different depending on the specific problems you need to tackle, whether you're in India or you're in Denmark, and where you are actually. But I'll see. I did a small presentation recently in the context of this cross-border living lab initiative we are trying to establish. I will see if I can make this work here. Okay, so do you see my presentation all right? Yeah. Oh, okay. So this might sound a little general, but it's just for me to find a place to start. So, okay. So why do we need a living lab? Obviously, because there's only so much we can do in the science lab. And talking about science lab, of course, that emphasizes technological solutions, but you could probably apply that to other settings where you kind of need to go out there and work with things in real life, because the solutions that we want to implement, they have to be applied in complex settings. So there's only so much that we can do either in the science lab or at the desk. But and how do we do that? As Vikram pointed out, it's sometimes absurd the number of obstacles you encounter when you go out there and try to do something a bit out of the extraordinary, and something that touches upon the traditional barriers. And you pointed to some 14 different governmental bodies, and well, I'm sure we have in a smaller context like the Copenhagen context, well, by the end of the day, I could point to at least 14 different institutional barriers as well, and they exist on different levels. So you need you need a proper framework. And I think what we're trying to do here is trying to think of it as a funnel. We are trying to slowly funneling decision makers in a way which is try to push some decision making, but without breaking too much glass in the boutique in the way. I think I have a slide here. This triangle on top is kind of our funnel. I'll get back to this. The proper framework in in the context that I'm working in right now is that you have here a small map of Copenhagen and Sweden, where they meet across a narrow sound, which we call Øresund. So this is a cross-border region, and they have established a sort of a common political body called Greater Copenhagen, where they don't have any executive power, but all the mayors and from the cities and regional authorities around this body of water, they meet in order to take some joint decision on how to further this region, mostly economically. But they have, in this context, they have sort of formed a green charter, setting some overall targets. One of these is climate adaptation or resilience, how to make Greater Copenhagen as resilient a front runner, and how to capitalize that in the processes. So there you have some sort of political framework to work from. And from there on, we've managed to gather specific stakeholders within this sort of circle of partners, and formed sort of a memorandum of understanding. So we go from an overall political charter, we sort of narrowed down and have some stakeholders joining around a memorandum of understanding, and from there on, slowly we transform that into projects. So far, so good. I mean, it's very nice of you to say, okay, now we have this interesting European concept. Should we adopt it? I mean, we haven't really established it yet. We are still in the process of implementing or developing and really implementing living labs. When I worked at the European Commission for, I don't know, in 2015, we started talking about living labs, and I think it's just now that they're actually implemented in the research framework program, and resources are actually allocated to establishing living labs. And in that process, we still need to agree among each other. What is a living lab? And that's why I felt the need to introduce some basic key terms, because whereas you've been working with this for a little while, and for you it's basic, but for other people, we just need to say, okay, what is a living lab? We have a geographical context. We might have some institutional resources. We can call them lighthouses. And we might have some demo sites that we can use. And in this context, we have started identifying various resources. These are some learning resources on both sides of the sound, and these are different aspects that we would like to agree upon. Relevant aspects to work with. Again, as Vikram pointed to as well, I think there are different aspects which can be relevant from one context to another. I mean, in one context, it might be educational aspects, it might be demonstration, showcasing. That's rather big. In Denmark, we are in many ways front runners. We have implemented some of these solutions. I mean, you are informed about them through your at least through your cooperation with Rambøll. It can also be research and innovation. We need data for one thing, and it can be governance aspects. I mean, how do we get important stakeholders to actually decide something? A few lessons learned from here. I talked to one professor and asked him, well, where are you on this whole living lab concept? And he said, well, it's quite simple to me. Everybody's talking about it, nobody's doing it, but we should we need them because they should provide us the data we need for further research and innovation. Another stakeholder of important stakeholder of mine from the biggest utility company we have, a head of planning there, said we expected to realize investments for billions over the coming couple of decades, but where are all the green engineers to carry out the work? We already have several vacancies in the department. That's a specific problem in our context. We are actually ready to invest and realize tons of billions of euros in climate adaptation solutions, but it's the lack of resources to carry them out. A friend of mine, a market manager, said, well, all these different utilities and cities and municipalities, they're each trying to do the same things, but each on their own. And he has a new innovative solution. He would like to upscale it. He needs to work with the local utilities and authorities, but he runs from door to door. And he said, I don't mind visiting every utility demonstrating the same solution, but they really don't get much value for the effort that way. So of course, there's a lot of things to gain from joint action, because we are doing the same things in so many ways. In so many different places. One important lesson, and then I will try to wrap up. I think I'm way beyond my 5 minutes here. I went to the Netherlands recently. We started building the Living Lab called Copenhagen. And that was an early attempt to try to say, okay, how can we make a sustainable platform, something which is market driven, something that doesn't need public funding per se. And that proved quite difficult. And later on, I think we realized that the most important challenge was a governance related challenge. So now we formed this rather large nationwide multi-stakeholder platform, which is more focused on sharing knowledge and supporting joint decision making than actually running demonstration projects as such. But with that in the back of my mind, we went to the Netherlands and to check out how far they were there. And in some aspects, they were quite far. But one important lesson there was, hey, this kind of endeavor needs public funding. So in some, I don't know how that looks with you, but we have debates here in my context, and I think we need to take a realistic look at how this can be driven, how this can be supported, and so far, so the most thorough experience pointed to the need for at least 50% public funding.
Thanks, Soren. Next, we have Neha. And I'll very quickly introduce Neha. I won't spend a lot of time on that, but Neha is a doctoral researcher at the Dutch Research Institute for Transition, DRIFT, in Rotterdam, Netherlands. Her work lies at the intersection of urban water governance and transition studies. She's currently involved in the Water for Change project in India, which is developing a framework to assess and strengthen governance capacity. So it flows very well within the conversations that we are having. And I shall let Neha speak to her research. And with that, I hand over to Neha.
Thanks, Suchi, for this very nice introduction. I'll just start sharing my slide. Let me know if you can see. Is it visible and am I audible?
Yes, absolutely.
Great.
Perfect.
Thank you so much, and thanks Vikram and Soren for setting a nice stage. And it's a great gradual way of transitioning to now more governance and social side of things. And also I'll try to keep things generalized and not too water centric, so it could be applied to more at an adaptation scale as well. So I'm working towards how informality could help in attaining some social innovations, and what kind of how it could inform the boundary institutions such as urban living labs. So as Suchi was introducing me, this is part of a project called Water for Change, and this is an Indo-Dutch project. And this project is working with the secondary cities of India, and our three pilot cities are Bhopal, Bhuj, and Calicut. And interestingly, these are they have different contextual vagaries with them. Like Bhopal is a capital city, Bhuj is an arid city, and Calicut is a coastal city with its own set of issues and problems. So I come from the governance background. I used to be a planner designer as well. And so how do these technologies finally embed, or what needs to be done? So these are some questions that led me to start this research. So this project came up with this idea of we need to transition to this water sensitive city. So it's an utopia which was suggested. But why was this idea was suggested? Because India has this mix of complex water challenges, which is of social, ecological, and technical set of problems. So this is a huge complex mix, and this becomes much graver when it comes to the secondary cities of India. And what are these cities? These cities display faster growth than their primary counterparts. And this definition of secondary cities is much different from the European secondary cities. So in India, the secondary cities grow faster than the primary one. And therefore, the government of India wanted to think of how should the approach be towards these kind of cities. And of course, I mean, the studies could be applied to the other cities of India as well. So this was a kind of idea that was given. And then we had to think of what do we need to do? Do we need to take it as is? Is this even a relevant idea? Do we need to appropriate further? So that's how it was suggested. But first, the question was, no one thinks of how do we want to transition, right? So the focus here is therefore like, what should be the pace? What should be the process of transition? So the envisaged paradigm shifts, which is borrowed from Australia, water sensitive city concept, was too radical for Indian context. I mean, like Suchi, many people are also working in water domain, know about the IWRM, the IUWM. So there are like 7 to 8 paradigms that have already been floated and none have been implemented. And then there are many transition scholars argue that disruptive innovations foster sustainability transitions. However, they couldn't alter the existing governance structure to the suggested people-led decentralized mode. At the same time, there were enough theoreticians and scientists that vouch for a step-by-step, iterative, incremental approach that leads to a more contextual adaptations. And I also know this is a kind of the sense of transition that we are talking about here in this group. However, I would like to extend this further to post-colonial geographies such as India, where reparative innovations provides an alternative angle of looking, a different way of engaging. Reparation is a multi-layered concept that has to do with maintenance, fixing something, and making amends. It looks at nimbler innovations adopted to a specific conditions. It seeks to engage with existing capacities of a given place, assembling resources at hand, and to create possibilities for adaptation. Rather than revolutionizing the water management practices, the challenge is integrating human conscious and subconscious needs that arise from cultural norms and vulnerabilities induced by climatic, financial, and technical incapacities. So also like some fodder for thought is like a lot of times we strive for this great revolutionizing green technologies, but sometimes these same technologies also strengthens the social inequities in place. So these are the side effects that also needs to be thought of, and hence these great ideas do not get rooted to the local context. So while doing my research and questioning this northern ideologies of how to do it, so we need to work on the capacities that can make this future possible. So therefore, I aim to update, modify, inform the rooted capacities to repair or reparate the system. And I very much encourage to use the word repair, update, upgrade. So these are the ways, I mean, you can work with the smaller things and then attain the larger goal. Slowly working with the social justice, the social inequities at space. So that's the kind of approach that I look at through for the resilience work. And how do we do it? It's through informality. It's by performing informality. And yes, I very much meant the word perform. So what does informality mean? So moving beyond the descriptive binary use of the term informality, like opposite of formal, I define informality as an organizing logic for both state and non-state actors to make the system work. So it is performed through disaggregation, which articulates the number of activities that takes place to realize a single water service delivery. So take any system, divide into many smaller tasks, and that's disaggregation, right? And then through co-production, which is expressed through social dynamics by different actors to realize a water system. So to summarize, I study informality, how it is performed by private service providers, users, authorities to enable a water service by navigating, bypassing, negotiating the bureaucratic and local institutions. But I also know that it allows a limited benefit. It also leads to unaccountability and unequal provisioning. However, the informality's notorious trait also hinders it from being instrumentalizing to enable smooth adaptation practice in the presence of complex societal norms, therefore leading to simply repair the system. However, when the same mode of governance, when aligned with long-term objectives, equitable objectives with people-led coalitions, does show potential towards reparation. And that's how I differentiate between repair and reparation. So repair is more ad hoc, more short-term, more towards personally vested gains, while reparative approach is towards more long-term, looking at more interesting coalitions among the groups. So while there is a limited understanding of how informality can be developed to make this reparative governance capacities, this is what my research is. So I'm looking at how informality can aid in making this governance capacities, and that could lead to this utopic idea of resilience and contextual understandings of this approach. So in my research, I have developed this framework called reparative informality. So what does it mean? It essentially means two things. So one is the consolidative capacity that looks at how actors organize themselves to direct their individual goals to the sensitive water service provisioning. Additionally, Jugadu capacity of how actors innovate with available resources to challenge the very lock-ins in place to navigate power imbalances. So these were the two major governance capacities I was working with in order to make the reparative informality work. So what do these contain? So the first condition aims to identify common goals that help veer different coalitions and aligning individual goals of heterogeneous actors towards a larger mission. Directionality is supported by cross-boundary mediation through multiple roles such as boundary spanners, knowledge brokers, cultural mediators, and even laggards. And last condition identifies factors of building trust among the horizontal and vertical members through increased familiarity, technical competence, social trust, shared interest, and procedural justice. The first function of Jugadu capacity collectively understands the diverse forms of knowledge. It focuses on collective analyzing capabilities. The second function of Jugadu showcases discrete crafting ability to blend and recognize institutional structures. And the last condition is about credibility and anchoring. So while this was a framework that I had made to understand how governance could be then helped to achieve the resilience approaches, these two capacities are not established in isolation, but they very much inform each other by bringing more collective framing, offering new boundaries, and also offering new solutions for the same. So how do this framework then help in making these boundary institutions more situated towards Indian context? And now I'll be just using the learnings directly. So the first thing is the need for compliance of flexible, temporal, and dynamic memberships and representations, along with the usual. What I find in the very European and very northern urban labs are it's a mix of like scientists and practitioners who more or less are on the same page. But then there are many users who do not understand the same thing. So for example, there is a different set of understanding of science. There's a really need to understand the political culture of science. To give a very example, while working in Calicut, the idea of sewage treatment plant to do cleaning of water was not accepted by people because the STP comes in a low-lying area and it displaces marginalized population. So the idea of STP was challenged, so the idea of science was challenged. So how is science accepted in a certain society? These questions are never asked. So then who should be invited to challenge the very notion of science? And therefore, and what kind of groups are required to make it more adaptable to the new uncertainty that keeps on coming? And that is why the need to have more flexible and temporary memberships as well to the current set of people, and that also helps in extending the system boundaries. Second is the need for safe spaces. So in my research, I was doing ethnography, and I found a lot of people telling me different things when spoken individually versus collectively in a very formal, open collective space. So because the formality itself provides a lot of issues, and therefore there are these same actors do undemocratic things or gray practices to make the system work. So then, can we have a space to discuss the challenges and reasoning behind these undemocratic practices? Why? And therefore to resolve and actually resolve the root issues and not just the symptoms. So many times we always want to discuss science, but then unscientific subjects such as taboos, moral dilemmas, or culture, caste, these things are kept away from science. Why? So who will bring out this, and how will those topics be deliberated? So and also many times urban labs come up as a space to formulate solutions. I feel it should be more about creating more learning loops, a space to discuss failures and how these failures could be then used to inform new solutions. So this is the second part was about how do you make this space more safer, and can we network these labs so that the risks are shared, the learning loops are extended, then it also maximizes the visibility and amplifies the voices and the things happening at different labs. And lastly, I end here, is can we have labs which are more process driven rather than an output driven, or both maybe? So for example, in this project, we are working towards backcasting rather than forecasting. So instead of discussing who will do what and how, we are looking at what should be done and how do you backcast it, and then who are required to do that. And that also helps us to understand which are the new members that we need to do. And why is this lot of people, lot of organizations looking forward to this radical transformation, but then how about reparation, how about repair, how can we think about the process of change? And lastly, there's nothing wrong in having nimbler innovation, very small surgical approaches rather than something very very clean and a new thing that is coming on the ground. So can we work towards social justice, and that would embed the environmental solution in place? So yeah, these are certain some of the suggestions for the ULLs. So I will end here and open for discussion. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. You've possibly answered some of my questions. But this also gives me a chance to bring in this why we've gathered here in the first place, the fact that we all want to learn. And I think that was brought up really well, both by all three of you, actually. And with that, I actually like to invite anyone who doesn't already know the Resilience Knowledge Coalition, please join us. I'm pasting the link in chat. And this is an initiative. It's a network of networks that we host at GRP, and we co-lead this with ICAD and CDKN, both very strong Southern voices, and we want voices such as yours to be amplified. The COP is around the corner, so we're also working with the Resilience Hub as managing partners. So we would be very happy to have a significant presence of the coalition and coalition members at COP. With that, I think we have very little time, unfortunately, but all your presentations were super interesting, and I didn't want to. I spent time listening to you rather than keeping time, so my bad on that. But we have a few questions in chat, so I shall leave aside. And thanks, Sneha, for answering a lot of my questions. So we have those bits covered, and so I'll stick to the questions from chat. Vikram, there's one question around e-waste. If you could answer that in chat, because I think it might be more of a yes/no question rather than an elaborative answer. But I'll turn to you for the first question. If you could talk a little bit more about why NBS was unpopular, and basically elaborate on the politics of nature-based solutions in the Indian context? And there's some curiosity from the audience around that.
I mean, I don't want to say necessarily that NBS was unpopular, but it is. I mean, it's a new idea, and we have been talking about urban ecology and ecological assets in cities under various frameworks for the last 15, 20 years. And I think the added value of the NBS idea was that it was somehow linking it to climate sequestration and the possibility of bringing in some kind of global funding or global thinking on the solution. So I mean, to me, it was rather than unpopular, it was kind of unknown, and I would say the question was, does it really add value to the way we think about urban ecology, right? So that was the question that we were facing, and I think in the context of Indian cities, I think really a lot of this has to do with is again a kind of institutional and governance issues, that much of the assets that we talk about in the context of nature-based solutions are public assets, right? Like they're owned by public authorities, but communities have access and engage with them, like for the mangrove forest, and extract some kind of resources on it. So there is a very complex ecology of actors on the ground, and I think that's why the framework, I mean, I would almost go towards what Neha was saying, that in some sense you need a contestation around how do you maintain these assets and maintain the political interest around these assets, rather than some kind of a top-down framework on managing them, right? So I think that was the thing. The question on e-waste, I have not seen because I've not been following the chat and I've not been able to locate it. But I mean, we were not thinking about e-waste in the context of the Panjim Urban Living Lab. We are really interested in the idea of the circular economy and shared economy and platforms and so on and so forth. And I do think that the lab approach allows for those sorts of experiments, but not something that we had done yet. And I think, so I mean, I just want to make one general comment which links to the NBS also, and maybe then I will not, then we can move to the other speakers. But, there is this tension between a kind of conceptual idea that you kind of bring to a particular context versus what is actually the reality that's already on ground. And I sometimes struggle with finding the right balance or having a steady view on it. But I think there are certain situations where those bigger ideas and more dramatic radical changes are needed. But then there are other places where it is much more the kind of giving agency to the energies that are already seeking to change and stretch things apart, right? So it really, I think you can't have a single theory on this. You have to facilitate both sorts of situations, and it really depends on the context. That was my thing. Sorry.
Yeah, a lot of it is opportunism versus thought out, planned transformation, really. I agree, especially in our context in the Global South. With that, I think, Soren, there's a question for you around, and this is a very interesting question that's come up. Since you've been working with the Urban Living Labs for a while, and this approach has existed for a while, and it's a like we've reiterated through this process, it's an approach that tests out innovation. Are there any challenges of scaling up these innovations that have already been tested? What are those challenges, if you could elaborate that?
Well, first and foremost, sort of, we've been in the beginning sort of been trying to establish ourselves as a front office for innovative solutions, and I think the biggest challenge is to get local in at least trying to test new solutions. Obviously, the problem with new solutions, if you're a water utility, I mean, you don't just want to apply new solutions into your water distribution system or your waste sewage system, and you're not likely to scale things which you don't have a 30-year track record of. So that is basically the key issue here. So trying to get these authorities on board and designate demonstration areas, so and trying to find problems, and it's not so easy because it's secondary to them. That's not a key issue. It's only when something really sort of hurts. So trying to find a suitable headache for our remedy, and we've managed, you know, one or two places where, you know, there's this random place where people get flooded and you don't have an easy solution, and you're eager to try something new, and then we can agree, okay, we have a solution, but we want to make it a demonstration project. And what we bump into basically is it's also very much also a very matter of governance, legal issues, and that's a catch-22, and as well. We have government agencies looking at us saying, okay, it's very interesting because we want to be on the sideline. If you can do something that can inform our policy making, okay, great. So I mean, everybody wants something, but they find it hard to allocate resources because it's all secondary to them, if you know what I mean. So it's really a puzzle. I don't know if that made sense, or it got a little abstract too, but sorry for that. Anna?
I see you have unmuted yourself. Please go ahead.
Yes. Thank you, Soren. Actually, I think the question also embeds the idea, perhaps the objective of the Urban Living Lab is not necessarily to scale up. Maybe it is a way to provoke a possibility, or so. I was just curious also about, what are the challenges of scaling up, or if perhaps the objective is not necessarily to scale up. So anyway, yeah, thank you.
I would say one thing. I think we need to accelerate the market-driven uptake of solutions. We need to put things into the ground. Already there, you bump into an institutional conflict with universities because their key interest is excellence and research, more basic research. The closer you come to sort of applied science and demonstration, the less interesting it is for them. And there you can find sort of key conflict of interest sort of around the table. But I should point to one thing: is we need data, and that's going to be a key focus. Point of focus for us here in a Copenhagen context, because we are already implementing different solutions, and so if we can just get access to instrumentize, put sensors in them and sort of to retrieve data and monitor them, that would help a lot.
Soren, I had a follow-up question to that, and it's almost provocative, if you may pardon my provocation in this respect. Would you then say, I mean, this whole conversation around the objectives of the Urban Living Labs being a testing bed, while you pointing out that government agencies are not even necessarily interested in testing out a solution until it hurts. Do you feel that this approach might get into this endless loop of testing pilots rather than scaling up, if we don't think of scaling up as an objective of the Urban Living Lab?
I think you definitely need to be clear on the objective and see if the Urban Living Lab is the solution, then what is your problem? And that will differ from from context to context. I mean, I'm sure some places you need to be able to establish in pilots exemplary pilots that you can bring your local mayor or whomever you need to inspire and say, okay, that's great. Okay, I mean, because if the right people take the decisions at the right place, you know, a lot of things can happen. We are past that point in Denmark. So we need to focus on how to scale things. We did the planning, we implemented laws back in 2013. It was mandatory for all cities and municipalities to plan for climate adaptation. And now, and we need to, I don't know, some 5-10% of it, we need innovation, we need new solutions, otherwise it's going to be prohibitively expensive, and the business case is gone. We can't do it for the money we have. So we need to focus on how to drive upscaling and keep focusing on that. And bearing in mind that we need different stakeholders on board who's not necessarily interested in that.
Thanks. Very, very useful answer, actually. Neha, there's a question for you in chat as well. If you could elaborate with an example a little more on the approach of backcasting rather than forecasting, and that you mentioned in your presentation, that would be helpful.
Thanks for this question. So there is a step before this actually is about who does this kind of process, right? It's so the business as usual process would be like, if you see our master planning exercises, it's a group of planners who do this, but of course they invite people, and there is this platform to question certain assessments, certain solutions, and then they are and that informs the plan as well. So it's basically the decision makers are different, and then there are contributors. However, like lab gives this kind of an opportunity to have this different mixes of people as well, right? And then you can also have contesting people, supporting people, users that do not care about the output, but then they are interested with the processes, maybe because their stakes are different. So then how do you have these different people, and also how do you frame the problem again? Because people generally think like what they think is a problem, but sometimes that problem is also just the symptom as well. So then once you form a collective problem and then formulate a vision, when you backcast it, what happens is when you have this interesting mix of people who are not practitioners or not experts, you start asking the question, oh, if this is my dream in 2050, then what should be in 2049? How it should be in 2030? So then it's more about the dream, and then how do you make it possible? And how does it work differently from this typical process of, okay, for this vision I need to take this step one, because then this will make this vision possible. With this existing experts, is it becomes more tangible and more the steps are with whatever resources are available in hand, with whatever knowledge we have available in hand. When you do backcasting, I have seen questions coming like, oh, but we do not have cohesiveness. Oh, but we do not have an acceptance to this idea. So the questions are different. We do not have people who are even going to, they do not even have this as a habit. For example, recycling of water is required to reduce demand. But then if people in the cultural norms, if reusing water is not a thing, then what do you do about it? So then your questions, the step one gets much more pulled before. So, and that's also one of the comparison I saw between the northern and the southern ideas, is the step one for India is pretty behind than the step one for Europe. So it could be like, the transition or the management approaches start from step 5 in Rotterdam, and here we have to start from a different step altogether. And step 5 is itself is our goal. So these kind of things happen, and then you start working on, okay, how do I create cohesiveness? How do I work on social learning? How do I work on educating masses? Do I need to design jingles? Do I need to design curriculum? So these become my first steps rather than land use or, designing some kind of a neighborhood unit, which is actually my step 5. So when you start backcasting with different sets of people, you stretch the step one to much recent thing of how do you get people on board, and then you work on more social ideas of embodying, accepting these kind of projects, and then also informing, appropriating the goals alongside designing it.
Excellent. Thank you. I think we have already crossed time, but thank you all those who stayed back. Thank you so much for staying back. With that, I think I'll hand over to Vikram to close, and we can end the session.
Sorry. Thank you very much. And once again, thank you for being here and for this really exciting conversation. I just want to, in some sense, pick out 3 cherries from the conversation that we have had. So I think what Soren is saying a lot about, what we have now begun to discover with the lab that we've done here is this kind of public sector commitment and funding, and that becomes really an obstacle. Nobody really wants to fund experiments. But if you lean too heavily on the private sector coming in, using the lab as a way to demonstrate their technologies, then you struggle with Indian procurement laws, and you go against some of those challenges, right? So to me, that whole question of having these labs but having them funded is really important. We also thought about that, and this is something that I think Neha is also resonating, that at least in the Indian context, we have to start with learning and research, and we also have to start with data, and therefore having a university connection was really important. I know of labs that are purely kind of test beds for technology, but we were pushing it towards a more research-based framework, right? So that's the other thing. But I think the big question, of course, is the role of people in all of these processes, right? So there are points at which it is said that the lab is a way to co-create solutions in the city, and we, not in the context of Resilient, but we did something on cycling in the city of Panjim, which was really interesting, where we did a cycling experiment and we invited citizens to participate, and that was really successful, right? And that way we created some kind of a demand for resilience. But again, the people who came and participated that are like educated, they are on bicycling clubs, but how do you really cater to the real kind of the inequities in the city, and that is the work that Neha was talking about. And for her, innovation is almost bricolage, it's making do, it's surviving and finding like smaller strategies, and we can't lose that need and that tension. We don't want the labs to become another, I don't know, smart city mission office, right? Which is also allegedly bringing innovation to the city. So I think those tensions continue to exist, and I also think the North-South debate is really interesting, because here it's informative. To me, it's no longer about the North-South debate that used to happen 10, 15 years ago, which was like much more kind of, I don't know, almost post-colonial. Right now it's about learning, and we find a lot of similarities and differences, and it's a kind of healthy debate. So we continue to, so to that extent, I think this was really encouraging. I think I want to shut with that. I really, really want to thank Suchi and the Global Resilience Partnership for hosting this with us and hosting this for us. And I think that was really great, and hope to continue to have this collaboration. I just want to also make a pitch for transitions research. We are basically actually think of ourselves as a social science research collective. So even when we talk about labs, we were interested in the social dimensions of those innovations, and we are examining, at least in this current research plan, examining critical transitions, 4 critical transitions in the context of India, which is urbanization, low carbon society. But we're also interested in the catenation of the digital and sustainability, right? So digital society work. And our next dialogue, which will be at the end of August, and I can't announce our partners because they have not convinced, but we are looking at cohabiting the world with artificial intelligence. It's a very different topic, but again, it will be a lot of anthropologists and social scientists talking about how our lives in our cities are changing with the advent of and this kind of presence and sometimes an unknown presence of technologies and digital technologies. And we did some work on cities, sustainability, and artificial intelligence. There's a paper on our website. So some of that conversation will happen in our next dialogue. So I'm just pitching that. And again, thank you so much for being here. And I'm amazed that after so much fatigue people have with online events, we managed to get a very robust and group of participants and from across the globe. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a wonderful evening. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks.